Blog Talk Radio.
Hello, everyone. I'd like to welcome all of you back to Ohio Exopolitics. I'm your host, Mark Snider, and we are broadcasting from the beautiful Dillon State Park here in East Central Ohio. I'd like to remind all of you, please press the follow button, and you'll be notified 1 hour prior to the start of each show. This evening, we are speaking with James Horak from emvsinfo.blogspot.com, and Crystal Clark. Her URL is drowninginabsurdity.com. And I'm going to go ahead and try to give James a call here on Skype, and we'll get the show started. Hello, James. How are you?
Hello, Mark. I'm fine, and you?
Well, we're enjoying a little bit better weather here in Ohio today. I'd like to go ahead and try to define the New World Order again. The New World Order is kind of a secret power elite with a globalist agenda that is trying to establish an authoritarian world government that will replace sovereign nation states. The New World Order consists of the following people and organizations, and I want to add this group: religious organizations like the Catholic Church and the Vatican. And I failed to mention that last show. International financial institutions like the World Bank, the Federal Reserve, Council on Foreign Relations, the United Nations, rich and powerful families like the Rockefellers, Rothschilds, Windsors, the world's most powerful corporations, and the military-industrial complex, particularly of the United States. And James, there's been a lot of crazy stuff going on in the world right now. And I wondered if you could maybe make a few comments on the New World Order just to open the show up.
Well, it's had its setbacks, and especially I'm fond of giving them something to think about from time to time. Like most recently, I've assured them that their underground subterfuge for survival is not practical and will end up, with all certainty, being a death trap for them. They don't have any off-Earth bases. They may still believe in some groups, but they're gone. They really put themselves in a corner of the kitchen with wet paint all about them. Now they would be brash in trying to implement their final two steps. One is, like Carol Rosin discusses, the weaponization of asteroids and the hostile alien thesis. Too many people have awakened and are expecting it, and I don't think that the cell is going to go over any more than the H1N1 vaccine.
I hope you're right. I'm going to see if this is Crystal.
Yes.
Well, welcome to the show, Crystal. How are you?
I'm good, thank you.
Okay. Well, I'm going to read some prophetic material, and then I have a few questions I want to ask you, Crystal.
Okay.
Millions and even billions of people will be killed by acts of terrorism, by wars and civil wars, and finally, in some parts of the world, every third human being, and in other places every fourth human being, will lose his or her life. The nations of the East will rise against the nations of the West against the East. Many deaths will be inflicted upon the people by fighter and bomber aircraft. Bombs and rockets will destroy and annihilate smaller and larger villages and cities. The peoples will be completely powerless against all this and will live through 888 days of hell on earth, suffering hunger and plagues, which will claim even more lives than the war itself. Crystal, you talk about in your blog the idea that the media is trying to perpetuate ignorance. Let me quote you. No matter which branch of absurdity, death by ignorance, mass media is used to sell you on participating in for your perceived benefit, they must use propaganda to do it. Managing your perceptions of reality is a big part of perpetuating ignorance because they know people will respond to what they believe is true and not what is true. And I wondered if you could comment on that, Crystal.
Well, sure. It's always been really important to me to try to simplify what a great deal of time and energy goes into convoluting and overcomplicating, in an attempt to ensure that people cannot understand it. But in the end, the New World Order really isn't that complicated. It's not really as complex as people have been led to believe that it is. So I thought it might help to just look at the New World Order as a global corporation, which there's a lot of truth to that. But they function like a corporation. A corporation has a service line, they have a product line, they have a sales force, and they have a warehouse. And that's very much how the New World Order functions. Their service line is servitude, slavery, control, and ignorance. Their product line is basically money and death, which we know as the military-industrial complex. This is the wars, the weapons. This includes the GMOs, the vaccines, the chemtrails. Their sales force is the media, and their warehouse, in their mind, is the earth and everything in or on it. So the media is their mouthpiece. It is their first direct line of communication between themselves and the people. And that's really important because without it, how can they manipulate us? You know, when they put out these phony Hollywood videos, whether it's the moon landing or it's what happened in Sandy Hook or any of these other things, it doesn't do any good to produce those if there's no way to air it. And, of course, it isn't just television. It's also the newspapers and the magazines and radio and music. All of it, that is their mouthpiece. And people know that you can't even get into those industries if you aren't willing to regurgitate what they say without thinking about it. So the media is really just their sales force. That's how they get their messages to us. And, of course, the messages are never truthful, and that's the whole point, is that the media doesn't ask questions. They just regurgitate what they're told.
James, one thing that you've said a couple times now is that the New World Order doesn't have any more off-world bases, and I have a feeling there's a story there that you haven't told us. Is that something you can elaborate on at all or not?
Yes. The contingent that had been formed between the Soviet Union and the United States in a collaborative effort to establish bases on Mars and the Moon succeeded to a point where they were ready to expand. But they began to weaponize these facilities because, of course, they were better than satellites because you could launch ICBMs from them. So when they started that, they were warned. They were given a warning that they did not heed, and a fungus was released, a fungus that is normally used in terraforming, and it ate the metal that they so much depended on. And there were images of this fungus on tripods and on the legs of landers and rovers that Dr. Berggren had, and I had expected him to put in his last book, which he's not done. And I saw them, and other people saw them. And if he had been able to complete his last book, I think that there would have been a lot of opening eyes that realized that there are all sorts of revelations and all sorts of discoveries that go on in astronomy, not just within the purview of NASA, that are revelatory to the extent of changing the equation for a lot of people that may not even imagine that some of these things happen. But this drove them off. It gave them plenty of time to get off safely, and the remnants and ruins of those bases are there now.
So a fungus on Mars and on the Moon actually destroyed the New World Order bases, or they just literally had to leave because of this fungus?
They had to leave. They use EB craft, and EB craft have a metal that EBs can't make, but they get their damaged craft and repair them as fast as they can, but they can't make the metal because they're nothing but a sewn together chunks of meat with a computer terminal. I bet that's the 50th time I've said that. But they can repair, they can keep records, they can send information back to what is now a defunct base of operations. So that's all they're good for, and they are problematic, and of course ET has offered to get rid of them for people here, but of course the military-industrial complex likes to think that they're going to have the upper hand on everybody with a little bit of technology that they can glean from EBs, although EB's not really that impressed with sharing anything. And most of what has come out of the skunk works has been designed by people that were watching things and trying to duplicate them. It's kind of like the Inca. When Pizarro invaded Peru, the first skirmish they had, the Incas tried to duplicate the muskets. They just didn't understand the flintlock mechanism, or they would have.
I have to ask you this, James. Where did you come across this information?
I read. There's so many things that have been published. They're, for instance, by very well-established people that are historians, archaeologists, anthropologists, that just slips between the cracks because it's not promoted. Because it doesn't say what the powers that be want to hear. So it gets kind of stuck back in time. I'm very fond of talking about a guy, a fellow by the name of Walter Sullivan, who was the science editor for the New York Times. And in 1968, he wrote a book, and it was published in 1969, which had things in it that weren't recognized or spoken about for 25 years. Namely, that most astronomers and astrophysicists understood and knew that Phobos, which is a moon of Mars, was artificial, hollow, made of metal. And, you know, there are people in ufology, there are people in anomaly research that up until, just the last few years, never dreamed of that. That's one reason why they had planned in 84 and 85 that their first manned mission to Mars would use Phobos as a base of operations and give them a chance to try and find out what's in Phobos. So there are a number of other things that are revelatory about what goes on and what has happened, and what people just don't realize is not science fiction, but they have seen much less imaginative aspects of fiction. And so whenever anything sounds a tone similar to the fiction they saw, I saw that in a movie, it couldn't be true. I saw that read it in a book, it's science fiction, it couldn't be true. So that's another method of keeping secrets.
And, it's so interesting. I love to talk about these kind of subjects. And, boy, I could just feel myself getting pulled off topic, and I just want to talk about this some more. Maybe we can come back to this.
One of the things I'd suggest, if you want to talk about this sort of thing, get Cremo's book, and there are things in that I would love to talk about, because I can add some things to some of the things that he talks about. But his book is the most encyclopedic work written on archaeological anomaly, and it'll give people an idea about what the magnitude of hidden knowledge that is turned up by archaeologists in digs over the last 150 years that they've not been privy to.
I have the book, Forbidden Archaeology. Is that what you're talking about?
Oh, yeah. There are people that have taken, as early as the 70s, they've taken NASA images and found things in them of the moon that just completely today would astound people, but they're there, and they're using NASA images to point out crystal towers, to point out tracks of vehicles in the craters, to point out artificial structures, lights that move. A record of this type of activity called transient lunar phenomena has been kept faithfully for 300 years by astronomers. And up until just before World War II, these were open to the public. The records of the TLP were open to the public. But now it's classified. So the thing that I stress over and over again is that every human on Earth has a right to the knowledge of who they are, where they came from, and what their prospects for the future are. And it is outrageous and criminal that these monsters have set on this and suppressed it and oppressed people that had answers. And there have been brave souls that have tried. I am but one. But there are many of them that have not been served well by their efforts. And we need to understand that we are not going to get disclosure or anything like disclosure easily. We're going to have to be a united front, no matter what you want to believe about ET or EB or whatever. The truth is there that will allow you to put together what you need to know. And every time that there is a find which has records which go back to a prior lineage, it's suppressed. And so this is very important, and now there is one in Romania that the government of Romania is valiantly trying to maintain its sovereignty over to keep the powers that be and their minions from suppressing what's in that find.
Wow. See, history is like one of my weak areas. I just immediately get sucked in by it. And I always say on this show that our real history, the truth, the real history is absolutely incredibly fascinating. And I think that there are human epochs that go back and multiple civilizations that go back. And Solomon said there's nothing new under the sun, and that's why all of the, the cell phones, the computers, the automobiles, the airplanes, the rocket ships, this has all happened before.
There are two finds that are documented and written about in a number of works like Cremo's that have a bearing on this, that beg interpretation. And, of course, interpretation at this stage, you make a leap. But do you think for a moment that the string theory, the theory of relativity, and the Big Bang aren't leaps? They're not only leaps, they're outrageous leaps. It is no leap whatsoever to say when someone in a coal mine brings up a lump of coal that has a spark plug in it from 3,000 feet down, it is no leap to say, my God, there were some people here a long, long time ago, and they had the technology commensurate with ours. Or you go to the central Amazon basin, and there are these plots that are all exact in size. They're terraced up, they're built up, perfect for growing food, and irrigated on all four sides. And there are tens of thousands of them. So, wow, what kind of a civilization and population was supported by these plots of land that were obviously growing food? I mean, this suggests a population equal or greater than ours today. Maybe the Atlantean stories have some relation here. Atlantis could have been an outpost of this civilization, and it could have remained in the collective consciousness far longer than Plato imagined.
Wow. Crystal, I'm sorry to leave you in the background here. I promise to get back to you.
No, it's fine. I enjoy listening to it, too.
James is amazing. But I do have a caller I'm going to bring online here, and if you could state your name and where you're calling from. You're on the air. Are you there?
I'm here. This is Sam, and I'm calling from Atlanta.
Sam, welcome to the show. We spoke a couple of weeks ago, didn't we?
Yes, we did.
And you were telling me that you were being targeted by the New World Order, some kind of mind control technology?
Correct.
Can you describe a little bit of your experience to us? And then I want to get Crystal's take on this as well as James. So go ahead, Sam.
Sure. It's a long story, but in a nutshell, I got pulled into the New World Order, into a faction of it. I'm a MILAB. That's an acronym for military abductee. And essentially, I was a person of great interest to them, to the military, because of some things that I was into, and because I was having a real ET contact. And so I got inducted into one group. I'll just call that Branch A of the military, and of course it's a Black Ops group. And then I got pulled into another one, which is the SEALs. It's a Black Ops group of the SEALs. And to be honest, I was somewhat on board with some of the philosophy of the, if you want to call it the New World Order. I wasn't necessarily against a lot of it, and you have to understand you're kind of in between a rock and a hard place, in that you can't really go public. People are going to laugh in your face, and in fact they laugh at you. The controllers, the handlers in these groups, they tell you, sure, go ahead and talk, go ahead and call the police, see what happens, meaning that you're going to end up in a psych ward, which is correct. So I played the best cards that I could. I kind of made a deal with the devil, so to speak, and that's how I got pulled in so far, and ended up learning a lot of things. But essentially, and there's some other people who can say this who are better than I can. One reference I would point out is Dr. Robert Duncan. He's got a book called Project Soulcatcher. Yeah,
I just got that book, and I've been reading it. And the technology that he talks about is pretty amazing. They can control the human mind at a distance, and they have technology now that can single out a person out of a crowd and control that person's mind. At least according to Robert Duncan, they do. So
it's a piece of cake. And I would also, another excellent resource I would refer people to is Jesse Ventura's, one of his conspiracy theory episodes, documentary. It's entitled Brain Invaders, I think it is. And you can look that up on YouTube or just on the web and find the video from his site. It is excellent. So if there's any doubt, if any of this sounds too far out there to believe, that documentary alone totally puts it to rest. And Robert Duncan was one of the scientists. He's a Harvard grad, and one of the scientists who worked in the CIA on this kind of stuff. But
so Sam, in a nutshell, I don't want to spend too much more time here. Can you tell us what happened to you and what you were doing for the New World Order?
Sure. I was in the Psychic Warrior program, and that is, they did a lot of research on me and used me basically as a glorified lab rat. And anyone can go to my website, starseedresistance.com. And by the way, I have a number of very good links on there about mind control at the top of it, and how it all works through nanotechnology, HARP chemtrails, and the ELF waves. But that's what they were using me for, is in the Psychic Warrior program, and they're still doing that. And the horrifying thing that I have to say, aside from being able to fully access virtually every human being on this planet down to the cellular level, and I'm talking about the mind, the brain, which is really just a biocomputer, and the body, they can access, believe it or not, your soul, your spiritual essence. And this is something to the darkest factions in the New World Order that they want. And I know that sounds ridiculous, but actually, if you listen to Solaris Blue Raven and read her book, Programmed by Deception, she talks about it. She's very psychic. She has a lot of the same properties that I have. And this is who they're targeting, is starseeds, people who have paranormal abilities, who are deeply spiritual. They're very interested in this stuff.
I appreciate you sharing this with us, and I'm going to put you on mute now, and I want to hear from Crystal, and I want to hear from James and kind of get their feedback on this. Crystal, how about you first? Does this ring a bell with you? Do you know anything about any of the things that Sam is telling us about?
Well, unfortunately, this is another one of those errors that we have made in the past, in that gifted children were removed from the general population and used for the own ends of the people who were in control then. So this is another pattern that we're repeating. But I'm curious to know, is Sam looking for help? Is he looking for a way to block what's happening?
Sam, are you looking for help?
Oh, I've been trying desperately to get out of it. I've tried about everything I can. Yeah, I'm trying to get out of it. Sure.
Okay, I'll tell you what. I think that I'm going to let James take it from here then.
Okay. James, what do you think of all this? Still there, James? Hopefully I haven't lost James here. I think James, are you still there? Hello? Oh, that is weird, folks. James, are you there? I'm going to hang up here on James and then call him right back. For some reason, James, we are not hearing you, and I have no idea why. So I'm going to call you back, James, and let's see what we can do here.
The person whom you're trying to reach is currently unavailable.
Wow.
Please leave a message after the beep.
Can you guys hear that? That is incredible. I don't know what has happened to James. Did you hear that?
That is really strange. Did you have him connected via Skype?
Yeah, he was connected via Skype, and
I've never heard a message like that on Skype.
I've never, ever heard a message like that Skype.
That sounds like an answering machine, doesn't it?
It does. Folks, maybe we're getting into some deep water here. I have no idea. So,
yeah, this is, I'm really glad that Sam called in because people don't understand how prevalent and widespread this is. I think that because people are beginning to understand it, that people like Sam don't have to worry about being labeled kooks anymore. I think there are enough people that know that they can find somewhere to plant their feet that will be helpful. James is trying to call me on Skype, and I'm not on Skype with you right now, so I can't answer it.
Hang on, folks. I'm sorry for the technical difficulty here. Anyway, gosh, this is quite disturbing. James, see if you can call in via your cell phone or something. I'm going to give you the call-in number. I'll type it directly into Skype here. Because for some reason, Skype just does not want to work tonight. Yeah, very strange, folks. We're having all kinds of fun stuff here. Okay, folks, this may be James. Hello, is this James?
Yes.
Are you able to, is it okay for you to call in with the phone? Is that okay with you?
Yeah.
I have no idea what's going on with Skype there.
Every time I tried to call you or you tried to call me, it would just release. You'd hear the first attempt and then it'd just release.
I wonder if we're getting a little opposition. Anyway, now that we got you on the line here, what do you think about our caller? What do you think about this mind control stuff he's been going through? When I first heard this stuff, I was very skeptical, but I've heard now a couple people tell me the same story.
Well, there's an irony here, and that is that the soulless monsters would even deign to discuss capturing the soul. It's another one of their implausible ironies that after they have suppressed the reality of ET presence among us, now they want to make way for a hostile ET presence or thesis, so they've got a lot of dirt to throw around in order to dig out of the suppressed reality that they have hidden for so long to create a false flag that, most people are going to say, well, what's going on? I thought you said there weren't any. Now, after being godless and doing the best that they could to destroy the hand of nature and anything else that observes wisdom when they don't, they're trying to talk about the ultimate heresy, literally, of capturing the soul. And, if that were possible, once it was done, this would all end. It would end in a heartbeat.
Well, what do you mean it would end? What would cause it to end?
Well, it's happened 6 times before. 6 extinctions. And that's the kind of crap that leads to them.
So you're saying the EMVs then would withhold their restraining power on the sun, and then our own sun would do us in again, correct?
It could happen that way, yes. They're not going to make a violent effort. They would just withhold that, but there's so many other things that are going on here that could happen even faster. You have a planet that's not stable, a planet that could come apart.
Now, what do you mean by that, James? What do you mean our planet?
Literally come apart.
Crystal, have you heard any of this? Does this ring a bell with you at all?
Well, nature has a very specific set of, the best word I have for it is, laws and rules and guidelines. And because they are destroying nature to destroy us, they're violating all of them. And that will always end the same way. But I did want to ask James, because I don't know if you still have Sam holding. James, did you have any recommendations for Sam in terms of how he can protect himself from what is being done to him?
Yeah, I got Sam back on.
He can come and stay with me, and I'll protect him.
There you go, Sam.
Great.
Are you in Texas? Where are you, Sam?
I'm in Atlanta.
Oh, you're in Atlanta. That's correct.
I'm in Atlanta. Yep.
So are they still terrorizing you? Do you hear voices in your head? What kind of trauma are you going through?
Well, yeah, what that is synthetic telepathy. That's how they communicate with you. Sure, yeah, they've been doing that. And I have to say, there's an upside to it, too. Like I said before, there's definitely perks, especially early on. There was a lot of the abuse. I mean, it's MK Ultra tactics. That's really what it is. And what they really are, how these MILAB Black Ops groups really function, they're more like a cult. And the idea is to break you down, to depersonalize you, just like basic training, except much worse. And essentially they meld you into them. You become one of them. And that's what they wanted. They wanted me to become one of them. And to a large extent I was. Where I drew the line is when they started using me, they started actually mapping, trying to map me communicating with dead relatives and things like that. It was amazing. And that's when I found out what they were really doing with this stuff. That's where I said, no way. These aren't just crimes against humanity. These are crimes against God. And that's when I started to go public and to get vocal about it and publish this website. And I might add that a lot of this really is under transhumanism, and what they want to be able to do. Those comments were right on about this being the end of mankind, which is essentially what I think they were saying, your guest, and that is correct. What they want to be able to do ultimately is, and I know this sounds mad, but and it is mad, it is insane, but it's true. They want to be able to control who reincarnates. They want that level of control. Mm-hmm. And so where we're headed to is essentially a soulless kind of humanoid. You can call it singularity or transhumanism or whatever you want, but it's pure evil. It's pure evil. They want to be able to control where the soul goes, after you die, and they have synthetic dimensions they've created. And,
wow.
And
this is incredible.
They've got breeding programs. I've got a child through it. It's conspiracy theory. It's true conspiracy theory, and it's a breakaway civilization is what it is. It's incredible.
Hang on, Sam. I want to get James and Crystal's take on this. I've done a little research into transhumanism, and it's the next step, I think, of the New World Order. They want to merge man with machine, and that's why, we have all these handheld devices and people are obsessed with their cell phones. And I had no idea that they had actually gone this far, evidently, to supposedly be able to control who reincarnates. James, have you done any research into any of this? Does this ring a bell with you?
Tell me something. Are you familiar with people calling their cell phones lifelines?
No.
I've heard that many times. I don't use a cell phone. I did at one time, but I decided that I didn't need it and didn't want it anymore. And this is before I realized that any wireless instrument is capable of being used against you. And Crystal and I have a colleague, a very dear colleague, who went through some of what the gentleman is describing.
Really?
And yes, and it almost led to an ultimate disaster. It was like he said with her, it had an upside for a while, and then it turned on her
and even threatened her survival and that of her family. So we are dealing with an ultimate evil here. It is something that these monsters would do to every one of us if they could. They are further than the experimental stage right now, and this is what ultimately Mr. Computer is all about. And that thing is up and running now.
What thing?
Mr. Computer in Utah.
What is Mr. Computer in Utah?
Mr. Computer is the ultimate computer. To say that he's capable of artificial intelligence is to leave off a great deal. He is capable of a collective artificial intelligence, which is so much more. Now, the monsters have no ability to distinguish between the psyche and the soul, or they wouldn't say the stupid things that they say about capturing a soul. But, if they can make you believe that, then they own you by fear, don't they?
Absolutely.
So Mr. Computer is like 2,500 mainframes, tentacled out to every device which communicates, every device that communicates, and capable of actually taking a photo shot of a human mind, recording it, and redelivering it to a clone. You understand what I'm saying?
Absolutely, I do.
This would be the ultimate pattern or project for continuation of a government, wouldn't it? And there was a series that was very popular and was dropped from network television because it delved into this as a possibility. Not a Mr. Computer, not something to the extent that we're discussing now, but the inevitability leads where we're discussing now.
Boy, this is a very dark future indeed.
If they had their way, but you have to understand that they create their own mistakes with their pretentious arrogance. There's so many flaws that it is like trying to redirect human species along your own line of patterned control, patterned machine-made man without the benefit of time, wisdom, or nature. Can't be done. You can create a tragedy. You can create devastation. You can create the end of the world. But it'll be the end of the world for everyone. Because like I said, they can run, but they can't hide.
Crystal, do you have any thoughts about any of this?
Well, I think it's important to reemphasize what James said in that what they're saying they have the ability to do, they do not have the ability to do, even if they believe that they do, because the body-mind is not the soul. In fact, so many people have talked about this, and James has even written a really wonderful article about it. The mind is not in the brain. So just because they can take a snapshot of the pattern of your brain and duplicate it somewhere else does not duplicate the soul. I mean, there's a difference. And I think it's important, people talk about that at some point we somewhat choose the kind of experience we want to have in terms of, the body that we inhabit and all of the different factors that go into creating the design of it. We kind of have to wait. It's not something we can force. It's a natural kind of cyclical thing, and then we get the opportunity. But the body is a biological machine. And where these people are failing so miserably is that they really do believe on so many levels that a human being is nothing more than a machine, and that if you know what electrical stimuli to apply, you can get the right response. If I poke this person in this lobe, the left hand goes up. And you see more and more movies coming out with this theme in it. And in fact, in a big way, especially from a Zionist perspective, that's the difference between us and them. You see, we don't even have souls. And so we're just animals that are governed by our lower center and our need to survive. And that's where the useless eater and mindless breeder and all this other stuff comes in. But where they're getting hung up right now, and this is so important to point out, is that there will never be a supercomputer on this planet that can determine the outcome of free will. And they are already confused. because data is just data. It's patterns. You record patterns and you mine it. You mine the data and you find a pattern, and there is the idea that if a person has responded the same way to the same stimuli in the past, that if you keep applying the same stimuli in the future, you will get the same response. But free will is a very different thing, and we can see that they are very concerned with the way that we are responding to the gun grab. I think especially has really surprised them. They thought that we were just going to lay down and say, oh, yes, take our guns and protect us from the terrorists. It didn't work. So when we don't respond the way that they expect us to, that's really when we throw them for a loop. And the only reason we can do that is because we are not just bodies.
I agree, very much so.
There is something that they're terrified of, and it has a lot to do with, is our gentleman still online?
Yes, I'll bring him back on the air.
I'd like for him to hear this.
Okay.
A lot of the abduction experience isn't to actually enslave the individuals, but to find out what genetic potentials and variables will do what under certain stimuli. They know what I'm going to say is quite probable, that there are individuals who, because of stress put on them, can react in such a way as to manifest traits that they wouldn't otherwise manifest in order to survive. And this is not a mutation. I've explained this before, but we have no trash genes. They would have you believe that we do. We don't. We have viabilities which only come to the fore when it's necessary, but some of them can be quite spectacular. And I think for earthbound humanity, that's an understatement, because of what I've already seen, both in the past and in the present, shows me that even though you have a split consciousness, it makes for an even more viable potential. And as of the last few years, I've decided that the split consciousness is something the universe might need. So I'm championed that. I've championed that at home and abroad. What they're doing is that they are setting the stage for a new man. I think that there has been numerous fictional novels which have portrayed this possibility. And although these creatures like to equate themselves with Prometheus, in fact, they take their Luciferian and they have made out of their Lucifer a Promethean figure as a way of hiding or maintaining a subtlety that, well, we're not satanic. Well, they are satanic. I mean, who else would be guilty of such evils? So, in a way, they are creating a real Promethean possibility. And, you know, this is spectacular theater for E.T. They're here, and they're watching us, and, you know, I should have figured out a way to sell tickets to this.
I've got a few more callers coming on the air here. I'm going to bring on Hugh from Virginia. Do you have a question for James or Crystal?
Yes, I would like to share, if you don't mind, the interview I just recently did that ties in so perfectly with what we're talking about. It's and you're familiar with this gentleman, I believe, Randy Morgans, Off Planet Radio?
Yes, Randy is a friend of mine.
Yes, I did an interview with him, and this, especially for Sam, hopefully will be very helpful. You gave him some excellent advice, and you can pull it up if you just Google my name, Hugh Traulsen, Traulsen, Synchro, Synchro, Mystic, Mystic, Encounters. When you see what I've been through, this can be reversed. You're so on target, James. It's your faith. And when you let go of the fear and let God, that's what they don't want you to do. And I have them on the run, and I'm solution-oriented. I'm going to take their money away from them now, too.
Well, good.
Thank you. I appreciate it. Go ahead, James.
Yes, I think it's very important to understand that there is design in all things, and like Crystal says that smacks of a designer.
Very well said, James. I have another caller here. This is Peter from Miami, Florida. Peter, how are you this evening?
Hey, great show. I have three little questions. The first one for Crystal, James. Do you think the Earth is also hollow?
Crystal, you want to start with that one?
Well, actually, James is very well aware of the elders who live there. I think he can probably answer that better.
Okay, James?
Well, we have a core. We have a mantle. But there are places in the inner Earth where there are people that have been there a long time. There is a group who is associated with a former lineage. There are people that were driven by the church into hiding because they had a different shape of head. Rather than be massacred, they went into the inner Earth. The Earth isn't, I wouldn't say hollow, it has cavities. And there are a number of ways that these can be accessed. There are entry points that are protected. The melting of Greenland will expose one.
Okay. The second question is, do you think that this Pope, Pope Benedict, and the previous one, Pope John Paul, if they had been cloned, or if Pope Benedict has already been cloned and there's I guess, the soul didn't want to go with a clone or something?
They certainly have the capacity to do that, and they've had the capacity to do that for a number of years. And as we know, and as that former caller can verify, usually if they can do things, they'll do them if it plays into their game plan. So I think that the possibility exists because it's very important that anyone, even though they're old in years, be controllable or be predictable. And when they're not, they're replaced. Maybe this is a way of producing a younger version. But it's a possibility, and one I wouldn't be skeptical of if we saw more evidence.
Right. Now, the third one is, aren't there benevolent ETs that are kind of protecting the entire population so that the atomic bombs aren't set off or World War III isn't? I think there's something called the Galactic Federation of Light or something like that.
Well, no, that's a farce. I know some of the people that started that as a lark. It was done here in South Texas, and these people were young darlings of the oil industry. One of them had invented the lockdown valve, and they were pretty well off. So they had some spare time on their hands, and they thought they would play that game. And this was years ago, but I know about it, and I've spoken about it. The Galactic Federation of Light is nothing but a permutation of the Galactic Federation that they founded, and they first advertised in a local little periodical that was put out by someone here in Fort Worth, and it took off from there. And this was back in the very early 80s. And then another follow-up is on light working, and there are a lot of good people in light working for one thing or another, just like there are in various other organizations, but it's another one of those potential fronts for the same kind of thing. So just because they use the word light working or they use the word Prometheus or whatever, don't be taken in by it.
Right. There's a short video of the meteor coming into Russia, and there are 3 spaceships that are either affecting or bombing this meteor so that it doesn't go exactly what it was supposed to, or something like that. And it's a short video on YouTube. I'll try to send it to you, Mark.
The other thing you said about ETs helping, there have been 2 incidents where ETs stopped a nuclear assault against a Middle East nation. Israel was going to launch against Iran, and nothing would work.
Exactly. Okay, that's the ones that and that would have been the same thing with North Korea and their attempt to put out a nuclear bomb on their rockets, or?
Well, the North Koreans don't believe that you're getting the truth about any of the nations that are on the hit list. North Korea is run by a despot, that's for certain, but Iran is not. So they would like to lump all these people into the same evil empire crap that Ronald Reagan did back in the 80s. So don't fall for it.
Right.
Don't fall for it. North Korea is a thing unto itself. If they were left alone, I think they would solve their own problems and go their own way. But that's not to say that when you have a despot that they can't become dangerous. I believe that most of what is being worked up in the world today is fear-mongering. North Korea has always had a problem with South Korea, primarily because South Korea is a base of operation for the United States. If there was going to be any kind of peace between South Korea and North Korea, it would begin with the United States leaving and taking their bases with them. And then we might see a new line of communication open up with South and North Korea.
Yes. One last statement I'll go. This thing with Hugo Chavez, it smells like a clone to me. It smells like, the same thing. Castro should be 90 years old, and he should be almost dropping dead. And every time he comes around on TV, he looks better. So the thing with Hugo Chavez, I think it's like the Pope. They either try to clone one or something like that.
Well, you never know. But, cloning only serves one purpose, and that's to increase longevity. It doesn't give them any special powers or produce a superior individual.
Well, anyway, Mark, this is a damn good show, okay? I hate to say that, but I don't even know how I'm going to sleep after this. But anyway, I'll listen on the phone. All right? Thanks.
Thank you for those great, fantastic questions, Peter. Crystal, you're as quiet and amazed as I am. Do you have any thoughts on any of this?
No, I just think that it's so nice to hear people ask questions that really, I think, should have been asked a long time ago. There's, it's very much like, I think, Sam, people have been conned into believing that, people will think you're crazy. Well, it depends on the people.
Right.
There are plenty of people on this planet who really get what's going on. They just don't want you to know that, because you have to feel alone to be controlled. That's really important. So I'm just enjoying the questions that people are asking. I've done, a 3-hour show with James, just the two of us, to ask questions that I thought were important, but, everybody is different, and the questions that I think of are not the same as the questions that other people think of. So I enjoy it. I enjoy hearing their questions just as much.
James, you had mentioned that there are people in the inner earth that have a different shaped head than we do. Can you tell us a little bit about them?
Well, the coneheads. About the same time as the Huguenot massacre in Paris, the same thing happened to the coneheads. There are paintings, Renaissance paintings, that you can find that portray this.
Amazing.
In museums. A lot of people think, well, that's a person that is a heretic because they're wearing the heretic's hat. When the Inquisition puts the question to you, they put this conical hat on you like a dunce hat, and that's what they think that is, but it isn't. It isn't. There are people that had conical heads that were completely different. And, of course, the church gets rid of people that don't fit its way of looking at things, or they did. And, of course, there were other people, too. There have been separate species of sentient beings on this earth contemporaneous with this lineage. We have treated them with contempt. Every once in a while you'll find a throwback to a Neanderthal. You'll find a person who has more Cro-Magnon traits than others. You'll find all kinds of, this is a wonderful thing. I mean, the richer that your genetic pool is, the more promising it is that the species of Homo sapien will survive. You need the viability, you need the potentials, and, of course, the monsters go the other way. They'll tell you that eugenics is to improve the species. Eugenics is to improve their control of the species.
I think in ancient Egypt there were people that had elongated heads. Maybe even the pharaoh Akhenaten had a longer head. Do you remember any of that?
Yes, he did. Yes, he did. Well, they've examined a number of mummies from that dynasty in the royal line, and they have elongated heads. And they started because they were so wise and never vindictive, elevated. The dynasty established how the rule of ascendancy to the throne was established. The Egyptians knew more about genetics than we did up until 30 years ago, because they understood that the offspring of a man and his mother's uncle, brother, his uncle on his mother's side, would produce an offspring more like him than if it was his father. Then they also knew the same would produce for a queen with the maternal niece and the man. So they had this order. The fiction about Moses is unreliable. The story that has been passed down biblically is unreliable because Moses was named Moses Ra, which meant son of the sun. And for him to have that designation meant that he was in line for the throne, and they wouldn't have made a mistake about him being found in a basket on the Nile. They would have made certain that if he was given that rank, that he was pharaonic.
Crystal, any comments?
No, well, actually, I think that a lot of the details that James gives are really so important, and sometimes people just don't have the context for it, which is why I like to kind of do shows with him, because I think a little bit more like, everyone else, and so I'm kind of like the mediator. In a sense, I try to make sure that what he says is relatable to the audience because it can seem so strange and far out. But regarding the cone heads and some of these other races, I think that one of the really interesting things that James has alluded to that I've not really heard anybody ask about before is that we came to this planet about 250,000 years ago, but how old is our planet? You see, it's been here much, much longer than we've been here. It has a history all its own before our history joined its history. And I think that's a big part of all the confusion going on. How much of the history of this planet that happened before we came here is being commingled with what's supposed to be our history, and it's just a mishmash of garbage, and it's manipulated to, get us to look at the wrong things and ignore the right things. And I think people just have to keep that in mind and really try to follow, a thread. Don't just hear what James or anybody says and say, oh, yeah, that sounds true. Try to reason it out with what you've been told so that you can find the inconsistencies and learn where the anomalies are so that you know what to look for in what anybody says in resolving it. I think that's very important.
What a show. My head is spinning. I'm like Peter. I'm just absolutely amazed by all of this. Folks, you've been listening to Ohio Exopolitics. Our guests are James Horak and Crystal Clark. Crystal's website is drowninginabsurdity.wordpress.com. James's website is emvsinfo.blogspot.com. I love when this show takes on a life of its own. I've gotten through 3 of my planned questions, and we just kind of went all over the place, and I just had a great time, guys. James, do you have any closing thoughts?
Well, I'd like to correct Crystal. She is far more than a mediator for me. She is very original and has touched on her own independently a number of the things that I discuss, and I'd like to give her abundant credit for that. She is extraordinary and very remarkable, and she is a very dear colleague of mine.
Well, I hope you guys will keep a little time in your schedules for us at Ohio Exopolitics because my listeners are absolutely loving hearing from you guys, and I am too, and it's been a real pleasure this evening. I want to wish both of you the best, and I hope we get to talk soon, guys. Have a good evening.
Sure, thanks.
You too.
Good night.
Good night.